Hi, I'm Saskia, CEO of Walcott Communications, and I'll be talking you through this presentation on defining research impact. This is one of the additional resources for your Impact Integrators course. So this short presentation really is the perfect place to begin if you are new to the idea of impact or you just want a refresher to understand how we're going to approach it. So, what are we going to cover? Well, we are going to cover official definitions of impact, the difference between impact outcomes and outputs, and I'm also going to go through what we think impact really means here at WCL. So, our own definition of what impact means, which hopefully will help guide your understanding and thinking as you go through the Impact Integrators course. So this is a fairly standard definition of impact. This one is actually from the UK Research Excellence Framework, commonly referred to as the REF. So for the first time back in 2014, research impact, in addition to research quality, became part of the research assessment here in the UK. The idea that you should try to assess the wider impact of research has really taken root now around the world, and you will find very similar wording used by national research funding bodies in Ireland, Canada, Australia, and the EU. What this REF definition is doing is attempting to capture the many diverse ways in which research can be made tangible, can make a tangible and material difference in our lives, be that at an international, national, or community, or even individual level. And let me draw your attention to the last two words there, beyond academia. You'll notice that they make it very clear that the impact they're interested in is that impact beyond academia. And what this means is that essentially what they're asking you to do is to respond to the question, who has benefited from this research apart from other researchers? So who in the wider world has benefited? And if you are considering this question before you have done your research, so actually as part of a funding proposal, the question then becomes, who might benefit from this research? So let's now turn our attention to outputs, outcomes, and impact. Now, these are the basic stages of how research is translated to impact. I've presented there a very simplistic and linear view of impact that doesn't really reflect the reality of how this happens, which is more often than not quite a messy series of dead ends and feedback loops and different research projects over a number of years, and very much incremental progress before impact actually happens. However, it's useful to spend a few minutes just talking them through to get them straight in your head, as I do find that they can become quite easily confused. I've been working in this area myself for quite some time, and I still get a bit, I can still find myself confused about whether something is potentially an outcome and impact, because sometimes it depends at which point in the impact journey you're actually encountering it as to how it's defined. Okay, let's begin with outputs. So you're going to be very familiar with outputs, as these refer to your research results. They are the conference papers, the journal articles, or the presentations that you give. Or maybe, depending on your discipline, it might be an art exhibition or a dance production that is your output. Essentially, your outputs are the products in which your academic reputation is built. Now let's turn to outcomes. The outcome is the change that your research helps to bring about. For example, the outcome may be new practice recommendations for paediatricians, or your research may produce a more efficient method to store solar energy that's then licensed to a company. Or it may be new professional guidance on how to engage dementia sufferers using creative arts. The outcome is, in this context, the use or the application of your research in a context outside of the academic world. So, to get to your outcome, usually there needs to be a degree of translation that is done that takes your research from the output and makes it applicable in any given scenario. And the time frame between that output and an outcome can be many years. So, the impact. When we talk about the impact, this is the longer term benefits, both expected and unexpected, that arise from the outcome. Let's take the more efficient method to store solar energy as an example. The impact from that might be that residents of remote villages now have a reliable electricity supply, which allows them to power their cottage industries, which in turn boosts their local economy. An unexpected impact or benefit from that might be that now they also have light for their children to do their homework at night, which means that their children end up getting better results at school and are performing better academically. The impact of new practice recommendations, which I mentioned in the previous slide. So, the impact of new practice recommendations for doctors may, for example, be a reduction in hospital readmissions, which in turn will contribute to clinical gains for patients and maybe efficiency gains for the hospital department. All of those things will take time to realise themselves. So, impact then is the longer term benefits that arise from the use and application of your research. So far, I have been talking a lot about benefits. And the word benefit that I've used clearly implies that the impact is positive. Now, when reporting impact, particularly if you're reporting back to a funder, you tend to report the positive. But in reality, the impact can also be negative. However, you are highly unlikely to write an assessment case study highlighting the negative impacts of your research, but it is important to capture and understand the negative aspects too. A brilliant professor that I know, a woman called Professor Gemma Derrick, as part of an international collaboration back in 2020, came up with the term GRIMPACT. You may have come across it before. And GRIMPACT attempts to highlight the negative aspect that may result from research and the pursuit of change and impact. And indeed, tries to encourage recognition and facing the fact that there might be negative impacts, and that actually it should be okay to capture this and actually to report back, because there's a lot of learning that comes from that. If you don't know, if you haven't come across GRIMPACT before, Google it, it's worth checking out. But whatever the scale of your project, I would say that whilst we tend to talk a lot about the positive impacts, it is very, very important to assist your future research to also have mechanisms in place to understand and capture what may go wrong at the research stage, but also the outcomes of that. There's always unintended consequences. Okay, after that little interlude, let's go back to the outputs, outcomes, and impact model that I have just talked through with you. Hopefully, from the previous slides, you're now clear on what these are, what your outputs, outcomes, and impact mean, and understand the process that gets you from research to impact. However, while you understand the process, there may well be a question nagging in the back of your mind. And that question may look something like this: why should I care? And that is a good question, and I would say a very valid question for an academic to ask. And I would respond to that question by posing a question back to you in response, which is, what drives you to do research? What is it that really motivates you? Now, in my experience, and I've been at this for a number of years now, most researchers that I've met or worked with a few exceptions, do research on topics which they have a real passion or because there is a personal connection through their own life experiences or the life experiences of people close to them. They are highly motivated individuals that have chosen to delve deep into something they really care about. So, most academics, I would say, are really there to make a difference, right? They're driven by this desire to make a difference to something or someone somewhere in the world. And I appreciate that actually it's quite easy for that desire to get lost in the drive to advance your career, attain the traditional academic markers of success. But if you were to stop and reflect, there probably is a problem, in society or within your research field to which your research aligns or can be applied that you would like to make a difference to. And actually, what impact does and what the impact agenda can do for you is to help you recognize that and make that alignment. Um, and the other thing I want to say about our definition of impact. After many years of working closely with researchers across many disciplines, I think actually impact at its core is about this attitude of mind. It's about understanding what it is that really motivates you and actually developing a particular attitude of mind that is actually evident throughout the research process from the very beginning to the very end. And what I mean by this attitude of mind is the focus on having an impact is actually embedded in how they think about their research. It tends to allow them to recognize that it's not just an endpoint, but actually it's the whole journey, which may be some years in the future. And you have to start planning for that journey quite early on. And it begins with relationships that they actively seek to build, often outside of their academic circles. And actually, for me, I think at its essence, impact is about this dialogue that you then have with others that leads you to ask research questions that are different to the ones that you would have asked if you hadn't had those conversations. So it really is an attitude that helps you to value not only the outputs from your research, but to ask if that knowledge will have a use, in what way, and to whom, and to actively find ways to make that happen. Sorry. And I think for me, that's the attitude of mind that often sits within impact. And that's really what we try on the course to help you to reconnect with and to rediscover. So, just to summarize, as we come to the end of this presentation, impact is not the research project results or outputs. It's not your article citations. It's not the impact factor of the journal in which you're published, nor is it your altmetric score or how many times you've been on the news, or the book that you wrote, or the number of keynote speeches that you've given. I've all seen people have talked to me many times about their impact and they've quoted all of these things. Now, those are all very valuable pathways to impact, and there are things that you will be doing, but it's not the end impact. The impact is the difference that you are going to make in the world. It's the reason most of you are motivated to do research. And impact, and as I said earlier, research impact will help you to focus your efforts to achieve that end. And if you're lucky, as you can see, you'll have lots of happy, smiling children. Okay, that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I will leave you with the challenge: how do you want to improve the world? Thank you.